The rain had just stopped over the city of Denver when the sky lit up with a strange green glow. Nobody expected the first alien ship to arrive during a school pickup line, but that is exactly what happened. Parents stood frozen next to their cars, coffee cups forgotten in their hands, as a silver shape the size of a football stadium slid quietly above the clouds and came to a stop right over the downtown park. The ship did not fire weapons. It did not send down soldiers. Instead, a small pod opened, and a single figure stepped out onto the wet grass. He was tall, thin, with gray skin and large black eyes that blinked sideways instead of up and down. He wore a simple silver robe and carried nothing but a small device in his hand. His name, as he would later explain through a translator built into his collar, was Doran. Doran was not a soldier or a king. He was a diplomat from a group of star systems called the Valkyrie Compact, a union of many alien worlds that had been quietly watching Earth's television signals and radio chatter for almost 40 years. They had studied human language, human history, and human culture from a distance, always cautious, never in a hurry. Now, they had decided it was finally time to make contact. The United Nations was informed within minutes. By the next morning, a proper meeting was arranged in a large government building in New York. Doran sat across a long table from a group of human scientists, translators, and leaders. Among them was a woman named Grace, an agricultural scientist who had spent her whole career studying crops and food safety. She had been called in almost as an afterthought, since nobody expected food to be part of the conversation. That would change very quickly. Doran began the meeting politely. He thanked the humans for their patience and explained that his people wished to establish peaceful trade and cultural exchange. The room relaxed a little. Then Doran pulled out a small crystal device and set it on the table. It projected a glowing image in the air, showing a chemical structure that looked like a tangled knot of dots and lines. "Before we go further," Doran said, his translator voice calm and steady, "we must discuss something urgent. Our scanners have detected a substance inside your food supply. A substance that is, by every measure our science understands, a dangerous neurotoxin." The room went silent. One of the human generals leaned forward, frowning. "What substance?" he asked. Doran adjusted the projection. The glowing shape spun slowly in the air. "This compound," he said, "was found in high concentration inside a common fruit your species calls an apple." A few people in the room actually laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke or translation error. But Doran did not laugh. His large eyes stayed fixed and serious. "We do not joke about toxins," he said. "Our scans do not lie. This compound, in the smallest amount, would cause severe cellular damage to any member of my species. And yet your scans show that humans consume this fruit daily. Worse, our data shows that this fruit is often given to your youngest and most vulnerable, your children, in something you call a lunchbox." Grace, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke up. "Sir, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Apples aren't dangerous to us. They're one of the most common foods on Earth. Kids eat them all the time. They're actually really good for you." Doran turned his head slightly toward her, studying her with his sideways blinking eyes. "That is precisely what concerns us," he said. "A species that consumes a known toxin without hesitation and feeds it to its children without fear is either remarkably resistant to poison or dangerously unaware of the risk it is taking. Both possibilities are troubling to my government." The room buzzed with quiet conversation. Grace tried again. "We've been eating apples for thousands of years. There's nothing wrong with them. I can prove it if you want." Doran considered this for a long moment. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "your species has built some kind of resistance over generations that our scans cannot yet explain. Or perhaps you simply do not understand the danger. Either way, my government will need to investigate further before we can proceed with any formal exchange. Until then, I must recommend caution regarding the import or export of this substance." He stood up, folded his hands, and gave a small polite bow, the human gesture he had clearly studied and practiced before this meeting. "I mean no offense," he said. "I only wish to protect both our peoples from a mistake that could harm the trust we are trying to build." After Doran left the building, escorted by a small group of nervous guards, Grace sat back in her chair, rubbing her temples. One of her colleagues, a food chemist, looked at her and shook his head. "They think apples are poison," he said, almost laughing. "Out of everything, They think apples are the problem. Grace did not laugh. She had noticed something in Doran's eyes when he spoke about children eating the fruit. It was not anger. It was something closer to genuine worry. Whatever the Valkyrie believed, they clearly believed it completely. That night, high above the clouds, Doran stood inside his ship, staring down at the glowing lights of the city below. He thought about the strange, confident woman named Grace, and the strange, confident way she had spoken about feeding her children something his own instruments called a slow and certain poison. He did not know if humans were foolish, fearless, or something else entirely. But he knew one thing for certain. His people needed answers, and they needed them soon, before fear turned into something far more dangerous than a simple misunderstanding over fruit. Deep inside a research vessel orbiting quietly above the Pacific Ocean, a Valkyrie scientist named Sella stared at a wall of floating data screens, none of which made any sense to her. She had spent the last 3 days running the same tests over and over, hoping for a different result. Each time, the answer came back exactly the same, and exactly as impossible as before. Sella was not like Doran. She was not a diplomat trained to smile and stay calm in difficult meetings. She was a biologist, the kind of person who trusted numbers more than words, and right now, the numbers refused to make sense. On her screen floated the chemical structure Doran had shown the humans days earlier, the compound found inside the fruit called an apple. According to every law of Valkyrie biology, this compound should have been lethal in even the smallest trace. Yet the humans not only survived it, they seemed to enjoy it. She called a meeting with her small research team, 3 other scientists who had been quietly running blood and tissue analysis on volunteer human subjects. Grace had offered to help from the very first day, arranging for her own research lab to work directly with the Valkyrie scientists under careful supervision. It was an unusual partnership, but both sides agreed that answers were more important than pride. "Show me the latest results," Sella said, sitting down at the head of the small table. One of her assistants, a younger researcher, pulled up a series of charts. "We tested 12 human volunteers," he said. "Each one consumed the fruit in different amounts, some small bites, some entire apples. We monitored their blood chemistry for 6 hours after consumption." "And?" Sella asked. "Nothing," the assistant said, sounding almost frustrated. "No cellular damage. No inflammation. No sign of toxin buildup at all. Their bodies processed the compound as if it were completely harmless. Some of their blood markers even improved slightly afterward." Sella leaned back in her chair, rubbing the space between her eyes, a gesture she had picked up from watching human scientists work. "That should not be possible," she muttered. "This compound breaks down cell walls in every species we have ever tested. It is one of the most consistent toxins we have on record." Grace, who was sitting quietly at the edge of the table, finally spoke. "Maybe it's not that the compound changed," she said. "Maybe it's that we did. Humans have been eating fruits like this for a very, very long time. Thousands of generations. Maybe our bodies developed a way to deal with it that your bodies never needed to." Sella considered this. It was a reasonable theory, but it raised an uncomfortable question. If humans had adapted to handle a substance so dangerous to almost everyone else, what did that say about the planet they came from? What kind of world produced a species that could casually eat what amounted to poison for breakfast? She decided to expand the study. Over the next several days, her team requested samples of dozens of other common human foods, not just apples, but oranges, grapes, tomatoes, even simple vegetables most humans considered boring and safe. One by one, the results came back the same. Compound after compound that should have been dangerous by Valkyrie standards turned out to be completely harmless to the human body, and in many cases, actually beneficial. The more data Sella gathered, the more unsettled she became. She began to suspect that this was not a small, isolated mystery, but a sign of something much larger about Earth itself. She requested a private meeting with Doran to share her early findings before making any official report to the Compact Council. They met in a quiet room aboard the main ship, away from cameras and translators who might misinterpret a still-developing theory. "I do not think this is about resistance," Sella told him. "I think Earth itself may simply be different from every world we have surveyed before. A world where the plants, the animals, even the air, produce substances that are normal for humans but dangerous for almost everyone else." Dorian listened carefully, his sideways blinking eyes narrowing in thought. If that is true, he said slowly, then this is far more significant than a question about fruit. I know, Sella said. That is what worries me. Dorian stood and walked toward the window, looking down at the blue and green planet below. The council will want simple answers, he said. Dangerous or safe? Threat or ally? But this is not simple. Sella nodded. No, it is not. Back on the surface, unaware of the growing concern above them, Grace continued her own quiet research, running tests alongside the Valkyrie scientists, trying to explain human biology in terms they could understand. She found herself surprised by how much she was learning as well, not just about the aliens, but about her own species. She had never thought twice about eating an apple. Now she understood, for the first time, just how remarkable something so ordinary really was. That night, Sella stayed awake long after her assistants had gone to rest, staring at the endless list of compounds her team had tested. Toxin after toxin, according to her people's science. And yet the humans consumed every single one without fear, without hesitation, and without any understanding of just how unusual that truly was. She began to wonder if the real danger was not the fruit at all, but the simple fact that humans had no idea just how different, and possibly how important, they might turn out to be. Riverside Elementary School had never hosted an alien visitor before, and the principal, a nervous but excited woman named Carol, had spent an entire week preparing for the event. Balloons lined the hallway. A handmade banner read, "Welcome friends from the stars," and every teacher had been given a short list of approved topics to discuss, along with a much longer list of topics to avoid. The visit was meant to be simple. As part of a growing cultural exchange program, a small group of Valkyrie observers would tour a normal human school, sit in on a few classes, and see what everyday human life looked like for the youngest members of society. Grace had helped arrange the visit herself, hoping it would build trust between the two peoples after weeks of tense meetings about food safety. The Valkyrie delegation arrived in a smaller shuttle than their main ship, landing quietly in the school's back parking lot, much to the excitement of every student pressed against the classroom windows. 3 Valkyrie representatives stepped out, led by a calm senior official and accompanied by a younger attaché named Torv, who had never left his home world before this assignment. The tour began well. The students, at first shy, quickly grew curious, asking questions about spaceships and other planets. The Valkyrie visitors seemed pleased, even charmed, by the simple curiosity of human children. Everything was going smoothly, right up until the group reached the cafeteria at lunchtime. The room was loud and chaotic in the normal way of any elementary school lunchroom. Trays clattered, kids laughed, and dozens of colorful lunchboxes sat open on long tables. Torv walked slowly through the room, observing quietly, until his eyes landed on a small table near the window. A little girl, no older than 7, sat happily swinging her legs under her chair while she pulled a sliced apple from a plastic bag inside her lunchbox. Without any hesitation, she popped a slice into her mouth and kept chatting with the friend beside her, completely unaware that she was being watched. Torv froze. His translator device clicked as it processed what he was seeing, but his own instincts reacted faster than any technology could. To him, this was not a child eating a snack. This was, by everything his people understood about the compound inside that fruit, a child casually consuming poison without a single adult stepping in to stop her. He moved quickly across the room, his robes fluttering behind him, and reached the table just as the girl was about to take another bite. "Please," he said, his voice higher and more urgent than he intended. "You must not eat that. It is dangerous." The little girl blinked up at him, more confused than afraid. A teacher nearby, a woman named Ruth who had been keeping a close eye on the visitors all day, stepped over quickly. "It's all right, sweetie," she said gently to the girl, before turning to Torv with a puzzled but polite smile. "Sir, that's just an apple. It's perfectly safe." Torv's hands trembled slightly. "Your scanners, your scientists, they confirmed this compound is toxic to other species," he said, his voice rising just enough that nearby students began to notice. "How can you allow a child to eat it without protection, without supervision?" Ruth kept her voice calm, the way she had been trained to do during far less unusual classroom emergencies. "It's toxic to your people, maybe," she said carefully. But it's not toxic to us. Kids eat apples every single day. It's actually really healthy for them. By now, several students had stopped eating to watch the strange scene unfold. One boy, clearly more amused than alarmed, held up his own apple slice and took a loud, deliberate bite, grinning at Torv as if it were some kind of dare. A few other kids laughed and did the same, turning what had been a tense moment into something closer to a game. Torv stood frozen in place, watching child after child eat the fruit without a single sign of fear or harm. His translator continued clicking softly, struggling to process both the language and the situation itself. The senior Valkyrie official gently placed a hand on his shoulder and guided him a few steps back, murmuring something quiet in their own language. Unfortunately for the Valkyrie delegation, one of the older students had been recording the entire scene on a small tablet for a school project. Within hours, the video had spread far beyond Riverside Elementary. Headlines across the world read things like "Alien Diplomat Panics Over Apple Slices" and "Interstellar Visitor Tries to Stop Child from Eating Lunch." What had been a private diplomatic concern was suddenly a viral moment, half hilarious and half deeply unsettling to anyone paying close attention. Back aboard the main ship, Dorian watched the footage with a tired expression, rubbing his temple in a very human gesture he had picked up without realizing it. He knew this incident would force uncomfortable questions in front of the entire Compact Council, questions about whether humans were simply immune to danger, dangerously careless, or something else entirely that no one yet understood. Meanwhile, in a quiet lab far below, Sella watched the same footage with a very different reaction. She did not see panic or comedy in the scene. She saw confirmation. Whatever made humans different from every other species the Valkyrie had encountered, it was not a small or simple thing. It was something deep, something built into the very biology of an entire planet, and she had a growing feeling that the galaxy was about to learn just how deep that difference truly went. The Compact Council chamber was a massive circular room built high inside an orbiting station far beyond Earth's moon, a place no human had ever been allowed to see. Delegates from a dozen different alien worlds sat in curved rows of seats, their forms ranging from tall and thin to short and heavily armored, each one representing a different member of the Valkyrie Compact. At the center of the room stood a raised platform, and it was there that Sella now stood, more nervous than she had ever been in her career. She had spent the last 2 weeks preparing this presentation, gathering every scrap of data her team had collected since the very first scan of that single apple. Dorian stood beside her for support, though the final findings belonged entirely to her research. The chamber fell quiet as the council's presiding elder gestured for her to begin. "Honored members," Sella said, her voice steady despite the nerves twisting inside her. 3 weeks ago, we identified what appeared to be a dangerous neurotoxin inside a common human food source. Since then, my team has conducted over 200 separate tests on more than 40 different human food items. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. Every single test has produced the same result. These compounds are not simply survivable for humans. They are, in most cases, essential to their health. A murmur spread through the chamber. One of the older delegates, a broad-shouldered representative from a heavily industrial world, leaned forward. "Essential," he repeated, almost mockingly. "You are telling us their bodies require poison to function." "Not poison to them," Sella corrected gently. "Only to us. And I believe I finally understand why." She activated the display behind her, projecting 2 glowing diagrams side by side. One showed a simple chain of enzymes inside a human cell. The other showed the same location inside a Valkyrie cell, empty and incomplete by comparison. "This enzyme pathway," Sella explained, pointing to the human diagram, "allows their bodies to break down plant acids and natural sugars safely, converting them into harmless byproducts, even useful energy. Our bodies never developed this pathway because our home world simply never produced plants with these compounds in the first place. It is not that humans built resistance to a poison. It is that, for them, this substance was never a poison at all. We were the ones missing a piece, not them." The chamber grew very quiet. Dorian took a small step forward to address the council directly. "This means Earth is not simply home to a resistant species," he said. "It may be one of the most unusual biospheres we have ever encountered, a world where compounds common and even helpful to its native life happened to be extremely dangerous to nearly everyone else who was not born there. A younger delegate, representing a smaller trading world, raised a clawed hand nervously. If that is true, then their entire planet could be considered a hazard. Every plant, every animal, every drop of water could carry the same risk. That is a possibility we cannot yet rule out, Cello admitted honestly. But it does not mean the danger is intentional or even avoidable. It simply means Earth evolved differently, and humans evolved alongside it, perfectly suited to a world that would harm almost anyone else. The broad-shouldered delegate crossed his arms. Then I say we quarantine the planet immediately. A world this dangerous should not be allowed open contact with the rest of the compact. Several other delegates murmured in agreement, and for a tense moment, it seemed the meeting might end in exactly the kind of fear Doran had hoped to avoid. But another voice spoke up from the far side of the chamber, calm and thoughtful. It belonged to an older female delegate known for representing several scientific and exploration guilds. Or, she said slowly, we consider the opposite. If humans can survive, even thrive, in conditions lethal to nearly every other species we know, they may be uniquely capable of tasks the rest of us cannot safely perform. Mining hazardous worlds, managing dangerous biological research, exploring environments none of our own people could enter without extensive protection. The room fell into a thoughtful silence, the mood shifting from fear toward cautious curiosity. Doran seized the moment. There is another option as well, he said. Cooperation, built on honesty rather than assumption. We nearly made a grave mistake based on incomplete data. Humans were never trying to deceive us. They simply did not understand why we were afraid, just as we did not understand why they were not. The presiding elder considered this for a long moment before finally speaking. The council will not decide recklessly, she said. We will authorize continued research, alongside human scientists, under careful but respectful terms. No quarantine, not yet, but no assumptions either. We will learn the truth together before we decide anything further. It was not a perfect resolution, but it was enough. Doran and Sella left the chamber together, both relieved but exhausted. That was closer than I expected, Doran admitted quietly as they walked down the long corridor toward the transport bay. It was closer than I hoped, Sella replied. Fear moves quickly in that room. We are lucky curiosity moved just a little faster this time. Below them, unaware of just how close their entire planet had come to being labeled a threat, humans continued their ordinary lives, eating apples, packing lunches, and going about their days without any idea of the quiet, careful debate that had just decided the shape of their future among the stars. Word travels strangely across the stars, stretched and twisted by distance and translation, until the story that reaches the far edges of known space rarely resembles the truth it started as. By the time the story of Earth's toxic fruit reached the trading routes near the outer rim, it had grown into something far stranger than a simple scientific misunderstanding. On a crowded trading station orbiting a distant gas giant, merchants from a dozen different species gathered around glowing screens, watching grainy footage of the Riverside Elementary incident for what felt like the 100th time. Some laughed at the panicked young Valkyrie official chasing after apple slices. Others whispered nervously about a species so resistant to poison that it fed the substance to its own children without fear. It did not take long for opportunists to notice a chance for profit or for panic. A merchant leader named Bracco, head of a small but ambitious trading guild, saw an opening in the confusion. If humans could be painted as dangerous, unpredictable, or secretly engineered, fear alone could be turned into leverage, contracts, and influence long before anyone bothered to check the facts. Bracco's guild began quietly spreading a different version of the story across several trade networks, one far less accidental than the truth. Their message suggested that humans had deliberately built up resistance to deadly toxins over generations, perhaps even engineered themselves for it, preparing for conflict long before ever making contact with the wider galaxy. It was a small lie wrapped around a real event, which made it dangerously easy to believe. Back on Earth, Grace first heard about the rumors from Doran himself, who arrived at her research lab looking more tired than she had ever seen him. They are calling your people biological weapons, he said bluntly, setting a small data tablet on her desk. Waiting, hiding in plain sight, prepared for war no one has declared. Grace stared at the tablet in disbelief. That's insane, she said. We eat fruit. That's it. That's the whole story. I know, Doran said. But fear spreads faster than facts, especially across distances this vast, where most beings will never have the chance to visit Earth and see the truth for themselves. Sela, who had joined them by video link from orbit, suggested the only solution she could think of. Then we do not wait for rumors to settle on their own, she said. We show them the truth directly, before the lie has time to grow any larger. Together, the three of them proposed something never attempted before, a live, open demonstration broadcast across every major trade and communication network in compact space. Instead of hiding behind official reports and closed council meetings, Earth would show itself honestly, ordinary farms, ordinary kitchens, ordinary families, with nothing staged and nothing hidden. The plan was risky. It meant allowing cameras from dozens of alien worlds direct access to everyday human life, an idea that made several government officials deeply uncomfortable. But Grace argued strongly in favor of it. People believe what they see, she said during a tense planning meeting. If we hide, we look guilty. If we're open, we look exactly like what we are. Normal. The broadcast day arrived with careful preparation, but no scripted performances. Cameras followed real families through real mornings. Children eating cereal and fruit before school. Farmers harvesting fields of wheat and orchards heavy with apples. Cooks preparing simple meals in ordinary kitchens. Grace herself appeared briefly, calmly explaining human biology in plain terms anyone could understand, without exaggeration or defensiveness. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. Viewers across dozens of worlds watched with a mixture of curiosity and quiet reassurance. But partway through the broadcast, a sudden disruption hit the signal, distorting the feed with flashes of static and cutting briefly to spliced footage clearly meant to look alarming, images edited to make ordinary human activity appear sinister and threatening. Doran, monitoring the broadcast from the command ship, immediately recognized the sabotage for what it was. Someone is hijacking the signal, he said sharply, already moving toward the communication controls. Sela worked quickly beside him, tracing the intrusion back through layers of disguised routing until the source finally became clear, a small relay station linked to Bracco's trading guild. Rather than panic or shut the broadcast down entirely, Grace made a quick decision that surprised everyone watching. She stepped directly in front of the nearest camera, calm and unbothered by the chaos playing out behind the scenes. It looks like someone doesn't want you to see the truth, she said simply, looking straight into the lens. So let's just keep showing it to you anyway. The feed cut back to real footage, children laughing over lunch, workers laughing over shared meals in the fields, nothing dramatic, nothing hidden, exactly as ordinary as it had been before the interruption. The contrast between the panicked sabotage attempt and the calm, unaffected humans on screen spoke louder than any speech could have. Across the galaxy, viewers noticed. Instead of fear, the sabotage created suspicion, not toward Earth, but toward whoever had tried so desperately to distort the truth. Within hours, several trade networks began openly questioning who had leaked the fake footage and why, quickly tracing the disruption back to Bracco's guild despite their attempts to hide their involvement. Bracco's scheme collapsed almost as quickly as it had begun, exposed not by a dramatic confrontation, but by the simple, unshaken honesty of an ordinary broadcast day. Doran, watching the final data reports roll in, allowed himself a small, tired smile. They try to make you look dangerous, he said to Grace, and all it did was make you look exactly like what you already were. Grace smiled back, still slightly stunned by how close the whole plan had come to failure. Sometimes, she said, the truth really is the best defense. It's just a lot scarier trusting it than people think. Far above them, Sela closed the final incident report with quiet satisfaction, adding one last note to her growing research file. Whatever fear or misunderstanding had started this strange chapter of contact between two very different worlds, it was slowly, steadily, being replaced by something far more valuable than either side had expected. Trust. 6 months after the failed sabotage attempt, The compact council chamber looked much the same as it always had. Curved rows of seats filled with delegates from a dozen worlds, the presiding elder seated at the center of it all. But the mood inside the room had changed completely from the tense, fearful debate that had once nearly ended in Earth's isolation. Sella stood once again at the raised platform, though this time she felt none of the nervousness that had gripped her during her first presentation. Beside her stood Doran, and for the first time, a human delegate as well, Grace, invited personally by the council to speak on behalf of her entire planet. Honored members, Sella began. 6 months ago, I stood before you explaining why a simple fruit was not the threat it first appeared to be. Today, I stand before you with a much larger update. Earth has been formally classified, not as a danger, but as a biological outlier of significant scientific and practical value. She gestured, and the display behind her lit up with new data, charts showing successful, careful trade agreements, joint research projects, and dozens of new partnerships formed over the past several months. Human resistance to compounds dangerous to most other species has already proven valuable in several joint projects. Hazardous material handling, biological research in dangerous environments, even agricultural development on worlds previously considered unusable. The presiding elder nodded slowly. In relations with the human government? Doran stepped forward. Stable, he said simply. Respectful. Built on transparency rather than assumption. Thanks in large part to the mistakes we were willing to admit and correct. He glanced briefly at Grace, who offered a small, encouraging nod. Grace cleared her throat and spoke for the first time in front of the full council. On behalf of Earth, she said, her voice steady despite the strange weight of representing an entire planet. I want to thank this council for choosing curiosity over fear. It would have been easy to close the door before understanding what was really on the other side of it. We're grateful you didn't. The meeting continued for another hour, covering trade routes, research partnerships, and cautious plans for expanded cultural exchange. But the tense fear that had once filled the room over a single misunderstood apple was gone, replaced instead by something closer to genuine curiosity and respect. Afterward, as the chamber slowly emptied, Sella lingered behind with Doran and Grace. You know, she said, I still keep the original scan of that first apple in my personal files. My assistant asks me sometimes why I don't delete it. Why don't you? Grace asked, smiling. Because it reminds me, Sella said, that even the most confident scientific mind can be completely wrong, and that being wrong is not something to fear, as long as you are willing to keep learning. She paused thoughtfully. I nearly recommended treating your entire species as a threat because of a piece of fruit. I think about that more than I probably should. Doran placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You also nearly saved our people from making a terrible mistake, he said. That matters far more than the moment of doubt before it. Back on Earth, the world had mostly returned to its ordinary rhythm, the initial excitement of alien contact settling into a quieter, steadier kind of normal. Occasional Valkyrie visitors could now be seen walking through public parks or sitting in on university lectures, still cautious around unfamiliar foods, but no longer afraid of the people offering them. At Riverside Elementary, the same cafeteria that had once hosted a small diplomatic panic now proudly displayed a framed photo near the entrance, a light-hearted reminder of the day an alien visitor tried to stop a little girl from eating her lunch. The little girl, now slightly older and clearly enjoying her small moment of local fame, still attended the same school. On an ordinary afternoon, she sat once again at her usual table, pulling a small bag of sliced apples from her lunchbox exactly as she had done that day months earlier. This time, however, a Valkyrie visitor sat quietly at a nearby table as part of an approved educational exchange program, watching with calm curiosity instead of alarm. The girl noticed him watching and, without any hesitation, held up a slice of apple toward him with a friendly smile. Want one? She asked simply, the same casual offer any child might make to a new classmate. The Valkyrie visitor hesitated only a moment before politely declining with a small, practiced human gesture, a gentle shake of the head he had clearly learned from careful observation. He smiled instead, an expression that still looked slightly unfamiliar on his gray features, but genuine all the same. Grace, watching quietly from across the room during a routine visit to check on the exchange program, felt a small, satisfied smile of her own form as she observed the simple exchange. It was such a small moment, barely worth mentioning in any official report. And yet, to her, it represented everything the past several months had truly been about. Not conquest, not fear, not proving strength through power or intimidation. Just two very different beings, from two very different worlds, sharing a quiet, ordinary lunch table together, patiently learning to understand each other, one small, careful step and one shared apple slice at a time.